In this video, we're going to take a look at configuring cron in order to tell Drupal to perform regular maintenance and allow for modules that need to perform tasks on some kind of schedule to do their thing. Cron, not to be confused with the state flower of Iowa, corn, is a Unix command line utility that is used to trigger the execution of some task on a regular schedule. In this case, the task is going to be to ping Drupal and tell it to run the script, cron.php, which will allow Drupal and all of your installed modules to perform their regularly scheduled tasks. A simple example of a task that might happen is the search module. The search module in Drupal needs to index all of your content, but that indexing can be a little bit process intensive. So rather than have you sit there and wait after pressing the save button for a new node for the search index to be built, Drupal builds this search index on a cron job. In the background, Drupal runs cron.php, which performs all of these scheduled tasks, like indexing your content for you. It's done in this way so that as the user, we don't have to sit around and wait for the task to complete that might take a really long time. Once we've got cron set up and working, we'll also take a look at some of the options available to us when configuring the search indexer in our Drupal site. So let's get started. If we take a look at the code in our Drupal root directory, there's this script, cron.php. What we're going to do is make it so that this script gets called for us automatically at some sort of regularly scheduled interval. This script is what's responsible for telling Drupal, go ahead and run all of your background tasks, maintenance tasks, and so forth. Things like rebuilding the search index. One of the things to point out with Drupal 7 is you don't actually need to set up a cron job in order to trigger cron.php. Drupal 7 has this concept of poor man's cron built in. How it works is, as a user, when I view your site, as it's preparing to display the page for me, Drupal will determine whether or not cron needs to be run. If it does, it'll actually add a little bit of extra information to the DOM so that in the background, my browser is calling cron.php and triggering all those scripts. It's invisible to me though because it's happening as a separate HTTP request, so I'll never really notice that it's happening, but it does make sure that Drupal's cron is getting run whether or not I've set it up. You can verify that by going to the Reports tab, and then under Status Report, you'll notice that our site says cron maintenance tasks last run 25 minutes ago. Even though we haven't done anything to configure this or run our cron maintenance tasks, it's done so. It also gives us this link to run cron manually. In case we ever need to manually trigger it, things like checking for available module updates and stuff, we might want to do that. Just click the link here and it'll run cron for us. There's some settings related to this built-in cron. If we go to configuration, and then under system here, there's the cron option. What I can do is, once again, there's a button to automatically run cron. There's also this run cron every, and then I can choose a period of time. So I can say once every hour, once every 3 hours, once a day, once a week. It defaults to 3 hours. I can set it to 1 hour, and then it'll ensure that cron gets run once every hour. But what if I want to run it more often? There's no option for, say, 5 minutes here. What if I wanted to actually run this cron every 5 minutes? I might have a module installed that sends out notifications to people. Notifications get queued, and then when cron runs, it sends out the notifications that are in the queue. But I need it to be a little bit more timely than you getting your notification every hour. I need it to be more like every 5 minutes. It doesn't have that option, so we can take a look at how we would actually set up a cron job in the background to ping Drupal and run this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to tell Drupal's poor man's cron to never run. So I'm going to set run cron every never, and I'll save that configuration. In order to set up a cron job, I need to know a couple of things. First, I need to know the URL at which I can ping cron. Then I also need to know the syntax and sort of how to set this cron job up. A good place to look for that information is in Drupal's install.txt file. I can go ahead and open up the install.txt file. And if you scroll down through it, you'll notice step number 8, set up independent cron maintenance jobs. So this provides some detail for me about what I'm trying to do here. One of the things it says is running cron.php requires a cron key to protect against unauthorized access. So I need to make sure that I have that key. And then I basically just need to add a line that looks something like this to my server's cron tab. So I'm going to start by copying this line. I'll just open a new document and paste it in there, and I'm going to make a couple of adjustments to it. The first thing I'm going to do is actually make this URL reflect the URL that it needs to be for my site. If I switch over to my site and I go to the reports page and then status report, you can see here this line, to run cron from outside the site, go to, and then it gives me a URL that includes my site's unique cron key. So I'm just going to copy and paste that entire URL. And I'll replace this example.com one. And I've got that. So what I'm looking at here is a command in cron tab syntax that we can add into our Unix cron tab file that will tell our computer to run this job at some specified interval. We can maybe ignore this part for now. The part that we're most interested in here is the job that's going to be run. It's going to use the wget command, which is an application that basically just allows us to make an HTTP request to the specified URL with a couple of options passed in. -q, for example, is telling it to be quiet, to basically silence any output. Rather than print things out to the screen, just go ahead and do it in the background. So we use this wget command. There's also some alternatives that you could use, like curl, for example, is another good option. And then this beginning part here is related to how often, or the schedule on which we would like to run this particular job. I actually find that the documentation on Wikipedia to be really the most useful documentation about setting up a cron tab in general. Let me take a look at that. If I go to the cron documentation on Wikipedia and scroll down, and I like the little table that they've got here. It gives a good example of what each of these different stars or positions means. Basically, what we're looking at is the first one here represents a number of minutes, hours, day of the month, and day of the week. An asterisk symbol means any. So any day of the week, any month, any day of the month, any hour, any minute. This would basically just run our command all the time. What I want to do, and if we looked at ours, we had 0 star 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 star. That's saying once an hour, basically, on the 0th minute of every hour of every day of every month, go ahead and run this command. I actually want it to be every 5 minutes though, so I'm going to make some adjustments to our command. Let's switch back to here, and I'm going to make this star/5. So that's going to run my command on the every 5 minutes of every hour of every day of the month of every week. There you go. Great, that's what I want. Now that I've got this command configured, I'm going to copy that. I'm actually going to use the terminal to open up our cron tab file. All right, cron tab -e. So I want to edit my cron tab. What this will do is, I've actually got an empty one, so I've got nothing in my cron tab yet. I'm going to just add this line in there. I might do something like demo site cron tasks. If I add a pound symbol at the beginning of this line, that means it's a comment. It's nice to leave myself a comment so I know what this particular task is for. And then I'll just paste that in and then close the file. There's a number of different ways that you can edit this cron tab. I like to do it just via the command line, like so, using the cron tab -e. There's also graphical interfaces that you can use to edit it. A lot of control panels, like cPanel, for example, provide an interface that you can use to schedule these kinds of tasks as well. The important thing is we're setting up a mechanism to trigger this wget command on a regular basis. In our case, every 5 minutes. Once that's done, all I need to do is sit back and wait 5 minutes. And cron in the background will automatically get run on our site. So that's the basics of setting up cron. If you want to find more documentation on that, a really good place to look is the drupal.org/cron. In the handbook, there's a lot of documentation on setting up cron, why you want to do so, and different ways that you can do it. Once cron is running, another thing that we'll want to take a look at is configuration for the search indexer on our site. When I perform a search on our site, I'm going to search for the word Probo. I see it here, so I'll just search for that and hope something comes up. There we go. I can perform a search on our site. Drupal's built-in search has, on cron in the background, indexed all of the content on our site and made it searchable. So I can use that search form, return some results. I can find things. There's also a couple of additional, there's the advanced search here, which is, well, pretty advanced. To be honest, I find that the basic search is what gets used most of the time. Once you start putting this like containing any of the words, containing the phrase, containing none of the words, and exposing different things like the content types to the users, it tends to get a little bit confusing. Most people probably don't really know what I mean by a web form here. In addition to this basic content search, there's also the users search. People with the appropriate permission can search for users on our site. There's no user with the name Probo. I'm going to search for my user account just to show that this works. So I, as the administrator, have permission to search for these accounts and can do so, and that's great, that works. One thing to point out with the search in Drupal is that when Drupal does a search and returns the results, it's respecting Drupal's node access system. So in addition to finding any content that it's going to show me in the search results, it's also checking to see that the user that I'm viewing this as has permission to view that piece of content. If I don't, it's not going to add that to the search results for my particular query. Well, that's kind of nice. The built-in search in Drupal 7 has a few configuration options. Let's take a look at those. If we go to configuration and scroll down on the left here, we can see search settings. I'll click on search settings and get some information about what I can change. Let's just take a look at each of these. It tells me that I need to make sure cron is running in order for the indexer to work. Great, got that taken care of. Indexing status. It's telling me right now 100% of the site has been indexed. There are 0 items left to index. If I went and added a new piece of content right now, this would bump up to 1 items left to index until the next time cron ran. When it ran, it would index that item and I'd go back to 0. I've also got this button to re-index the site. If I click this button, what it'll do is tell Drupal to wipe out its current index and rebuild the entire index. I might want to do this if I change some of the settings below, for example. Another reasons that I might want to do it are if the index itself is behaving funny, if I've added a bunch of new content, that kind of stuff. There's occasions where you might want to re-index the site. The indexing throttle option here, the number of items to index per cron run. It's set to 100 by default, but I can change it to some other number. What this is saying is, when cron runs, in the background, how many pieces of content should I index at a time? It's set to 100 by default, which for most small to medium-sized sites should be just fine. It allows me to change it to something like 10, or a smaller number or a larger number, which I may need to do depending on if I have pieces of content that are abnormally large. Let's say every page on my site is really, really long. I might want to bump this down to like 20. Basically, what you'll notice is in your logs on your site, if cron is failing to run, or the search index is failing to get built, one of the first places I would look is this number of items to index per cron run. Maybe switch it to a little lower number. Try running it again, see if it works. You might be running out of memory or something in the background. Indexing settings. There's a couple options here. Minimum word length to index. This is saying when I'm parsing through a piece of content, words need to be at least this number of characters long in order for me to consider them for the index. So the default is 3. So it'll ignore any word that's 3 characters or less. This also means that somebody searching for things on our site needs to search for a word that's at least 3 characters long. So that's something that you might want to look at adjusting depending on your needs. Simple CJK handling, or Chinese, Japanese, Korean handling. Drupal has a lot of facilities for handling content in languages other than English. Chinese, Japanese, and Korean languages are written in long strings of characters and not split up into words. You can do this with UTF-8, and those characters get represented on the screen just fine, but you don't have the traditional like English where there's a space in between words, for example. It's just a lot of characters that are all strung together. In order to allow searching, what we need to do is split these strings into tokens, which consist of basically consecutive overlapping sequences of these characters whose length matches whatever is defined as the maximum or minimum word length up here. This is only done if this checkbox is checked. Not really necessary unless you've got content that's in Chinese, Japanese, or Korean. Also not really harmful to just leave it checked. Active search modules. Node and user are our 2 options. This is basically saying I'd like to index and allow searching of nodes or content on our site. This one's saying I'd like to allow indexing and searching of users. I'm actually going to turn off the user search function on our site. With them both on, I could choose which one's the default. So when somebody types a value into the search box in the block in the left column on our site, is it performing a node search or a user search? I'll leave that as node. Finally, there's this content ranking. This is probably the most interesting piece. What this does is allow me to start to tweak how search results are returned a little bit. I can basically say, give more relevancy or more weight to pieces of content based on a couple of factors. Those factors are the number of comments, keyword relevance, is it sticky at the top of lists, is it promoted to the front page, is it recently posted. So I might want to, for example, change the weight of something like recently posted to 5. And what that's going to do is mean that when somebody performs a search, it'll be considered more relevant or more pertinent if it's a piece of content that was recently posted versus one that's older. I'll save that configuration. So we saved a couple of things. It tells us so up at the top. Save down there. We can close. We probably won't notice the results in our search right away, but those are the kind of things that you can configure with Drupal's built-in search. There's also some other search engines out there that are really useful with Drupal. We often use the Apache Solr module and the Solr appliance combined with Drupal to create a bit more of a robust search platform. So out of the box, you just get this fairly simple but easy to configure search engine. There's options to extend that in Drupal contrib. So just to recap, what we did in this chapter was we configured cron. We set it up to run Drupal's regularly scheduled tasks once every 5 minutes. By default, Drupal will run these tasks for us at most once an hour. And it can do this without us having to do anything else other than just change the setting to 1 hour. It does so by adding some additional information to the DOM and just performing that cron request every once in a while as needed by having it triggered by the user's browser as they're browsing around our site. If we need it to happen more often, or if we don't want to incur that overhead in a user's browser, we can set up our own cron job. We'll turn off Drupal's poor man's cron feature and then set up a cron tab or some kind of regularly scheduled job that will ping Drupal's cron.php, making sure that we include our cron key as well. After we did that, we took a look at configuring search in Drupal. Our options were mostly related to content, and how the search indexer is going to work, how much it should index per cron job. When it's indexing it, some things to keep in mind, like what's a minimum word length? Would we like it to do tokenizing for Chinese, Japanese, and Korean characters? And then also allows us to add a little bit of biasing to our content.